Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tourism and Events Queensland's Special Invite Series. Thank you for joining us today on this focus on using mobility data and tourism insights. My name is Diana Mulholland and I'm Partnership Specialist here at Tourism and Events Queensland. It is my pleasure to host today's webinar with Paul Robisky from DSpark Australia. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we are all meeting today. For me, broadcasting from Brisbane, this is the country of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I pay my deep respects to all elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge that this has been a very difficult time for the tourism industry, overcoming the challenges of COVID-19 and the direct impact this has had on your businesses. TEQ decided to partner with DSpark telecommunication data in July this year to provide more timely visitation data and insights to our industry. Looking at this data has helped our recovery planning and complements the National Visitor Survey and International Visitor Survey data that we have access to. We are pleased that DSpark can join us today to share some insights with us all. As part of the session, DSpark will show us how mobility data is enabling the tourism sector to be more demand responsive by understanding visitor travel patterns and visitor behaviour. DSpark will take us through the current state of inbound tourism and trends across Queensland, how the tourism sector and local government can take advantage of big data, and explore how insights can be built for major events across Queensland. Of course, we would love to hear from you and we welcome your questions through the Q&A function today. On the right hand of your screen, you can enter your question into the chat function. Feel free to ask questions anonymously, but if you do update your name, we will be able to contact you after the session if we are unable to answer your question live. If you're having a technical problem, please type into the Q&A with the word tech first. We will also be recording this session and we'll make the recording available as soon as we can. A link will be emailed through the Eventbrite platform. To commence proceedings, I would like to welcome Paul Robisky, Country Head of DSpark Australia. Over to you, Paul.
Great, thank you, Diana. Good morning to everyone, to what I believe is a largely Queensland audience. It's exciting to be here today and to be able to get into Queensland, which I'm personally going to take full advantage of to come and see our clients in Queensland next week. So very exciting to do that. So it's my pleasure to introduce DSpark and the capability that we've got here as it relates to tourism in particular, given the people on the webinar. And reflect some of that on the work that we've done with TEQ, but also some of our other tourism clients. So let's jump in. I'll look to spend a few minutes just to introduce the capability and then show you some real life examples of how this is applied to tourism problems and questions. So DSpark is a data and analytics company. This slide here shows the summary of what we do and what we ingest and what we then do to the data that's ingested.
Sorry to interrupt, Paul, we're just not seeing your slides. If you can reshare that presentation, please.
Sure, let me do that.
Thank you. I'll have a few technical difficulties. It's just appearing up here now and good to go.
Great, thank you, Diana. So this slide summarizes the capability and what happens. And left to right, we ingest a number of different data sets. One of those is data from mobile phones that was mentioned earlier, that as well as some data that comes from apps, which enables us to have a much more granular GPS lat long level data set, as well as that from the mobile network, as well as other data sets, including public transport data, road network data, as well as data from immigration, which allows us to not only look at those that are Australians, but non-Australians who are actually travelling and roaming in the country. So that combined produces an amazingly large data set. So this is true big data. And we're looking at something like 3 billion observations per day, which, you know, if you compare that to, say, a bank, which might get 2 billion transactions a year, this is more than that in a single day. So the volume allows breadth and depth of analysis for very unique and interesting problems and questions. Very importantly, as we process the data and ingest it, this is a completely non-PII business and process and set of inputs and outputs, such that whilst we're interested in a movement and understanding of cohorts of people, it's never about the individual. We don't ever see that, and re-identification is not possible by us nor by our clients. So I do want to emphasize that, because it's an important principle that we certainly operate in at all times. Once that data is ingested and input, we then process it and enhance it and do a number of things with it, including extrapolating that data. So whilst we have a third of the population that we observe through the data that we have, I think most of our clients are interested in not only that sample that we get, albeit it's extremely large. They're more interested in the extrapolated data for all of Australia and all of the travelling population. So if I give you an example of that, we might see on a given day 50,000 travellers from China inbound. We see data from immigration that says actually on a given day there are 80,000 in the country. We'll extrapolate that accordingly to make that representative of that travelling population. The sort of outputs that our clients then benefit from and see include attributes of things like every trip that an individual makes, so the starting and end point of their journey, and that's starting and ending at an SA1. So this statistical area boundary of an SA1 is usually around a few hundred people. That varies in size, but it's quite a small statistical area boundary. So we can see every trip between those two starting and end points. We can see the mode of transport that the individuals took on that trip. So for tourism, again, that's very relevant, where you might be looking at bus travel versus passenger vehicle travel versus walking versus flights. That becomes very relevant. That spatial granularity becomes relevant as well, obviously, as well as some attributes that are inclusive of age and gender, as well as country of origin for those that are here from abroad. So again, those things we feel are relevant. So all combined, there's a huge data set that's being ingested, some really great processes and enhancement happening to that throughout the platform and process, and some very interesting outputs that hopefully you'll agree are relevant for tourism. In terms of coverage, look, this is an important question that often comes up, especially from some of our regional clients, where mobile coverage is perhaps not as strong or as broad in regional as compared to metro. I can tell you that the way that the algorithms work, as long as there is some connection somewhere along the way, it allows us to have visibility of the people that are travelling, and our algorithms fill in the gaps between those two. So a practical example of that is there might be a starting point and an ending point of someone's journey, but there is no coverage in between. There are very few places to go between A and B by that individual based on when they left, when they arrived, and what's available between them, between those places to them, and we're able to fill that gap in successfully. So what that means is on the left-hand side here, what you see is the actual coverage that we see, and the darker the colour, the more observations we're getting, or unique agents, which is what we're looking at here. And those white spots or those lighter colours, frankly, there's not really much there in those places. So that coverage is very much representative of the population. And then a deep dive on the right-hand side of Brisbane as an example. This is looking at a week period of observations that we'll find. And this has effectively created the road network that is actually in Brisbane. So this isn't a road network lifted off Google Maps. This is actually a road network that we've drawn based on people's movements and travel on the road, and then overlaid it on a map. So it shows you there's very strong coverage even on some of those smaller suburban type roads in and around Brisbane CBD, as would be the case in every other city and regional area. So hopefully that's a bit of an introduction on the methodology. Look, what's unique, I've mentioned many of these points, but it's multimodal, it's extrapolated to the population, it's down to a very low level of spatial accuracy. It's a blend of that app GPS data with a mobile network data. There's some really unique stuff that we've done with airports, which is important again for tourism, because phones behave strangely in airports. Often people have their phone on well into their flight or before they land, and so we have to allow for that, to actually have someone landing not wherever they've picked up service on the plane, but actually where the airport is located, which is important. But also, as of earlier this year, we are in partnership with Tourism Research Australia going to be ingesting our data into their reports, such that this data set becomes one of the key currencies of tourism and travel and movement throughout the country. And those traditional international visitor surveys and national visitor surveys will now be complemented by this data set. So that allows us to have all the right definitions in terms of overnight stays and day trippers, as well as the tourism region definitions that are relevant for all the, I think, people on the call today. So that's what's unique about that. In industries we work in, look, there's many. Tourism is the key one for today. TEQ is one of our earlier big clients who actually jumped on board with this capability quite some time ago, which is great. Tourism Research Australia I've mentioned as well. There's other work that we've done in tourism, looking at things like the Great Ocean Road, things like the Commonwealth Games, small events, large events, Far North Queensland, lots of different areas of interest that we've looked at. Transport, we work very closely with major transport agencies, including TMR. Health's been a big area for us this year, and Queensland Health is a very large client for us as well. So lots of interesting agencies and clients in tourism and beyond. But look, I want to get into the actual good stuff here. So we've pulled some data to share with you guys, which is the real insights that I think hopefully you're here interested to hear. So if we look at TNQ's, so Tropical North Queensland recovery effort. So some of this data here is looking at actually September or end of September through to end of November. So we've got a couple of months worth of data just on TNQ. On the bottom left here, what you're seeing is actually the domestic visitors. So we're able to derive where someone's home location is, and on that basis, we can then infer whether they're a domestic visitor to Tropical North Queensland or they're a local. In this case, we've removed the locals. We're just looking at domestic visitors into TNQ, and then we've split that by state of origin. So what you're seeing is most of those visitors in that 2-month period coming from Queensland, which I guess is expected. But then more interestingly, what the next question will be, how has that changed? And the chart on the right-hand side is really looking at year-on-year comparison. So we've lined up the dates, so the weekends match up to the weekends over the 2 months of October, November. And then the top line there, that 0% is really the baseline of last year. And then the line, those dots are individual days that we're looking at the change year-on-year comparison of visitation of domestic visitors to TNQ, TNQ being the tourism region. So what we're seeing is across the 2-month period that the average percentage change year on year is minus 42%. So that's your average over the 2 months. We can do that for every day, but that's the average for the 2 months. And this is up considerably from June, because June, when we looked at June, was 79% down year on year. So there's certainly some recovery, and you can start seeing that over the chart. But certainly not back to where it was the year before, and certainly a lot of those visitors from New South Wales and Victoria are still well below the levels of 50%. The chart on the right-hand side is total, but we can certainly cut that by states or by even suburbs or other areas. So to give you an idea, we have done this sort of analysis looking at suburbs specifically of origin and visitation into a particular tourism region, because the client in that case was interested in targeting different suburbs in Sydney and Victoria or Melbourne for different campaigns for different visitation throughout the year. So understanding when certain suburbs tend to over-index and visiting a particular area was in that case interesting to the client. So that was a deep dive on TNQ. We pulled a couple of other tourism regions here, looking at, again, similar chart where we're looking at the same 2 months of year on year, 2 months of October, November. And so the baseline is last year's 2 months, and then day on day build over October, November. So we're looking at Brisbane, Gold Coast, Bundaberg and Southern Queensland country. So you can see again, recovery in most of those is well on its way, with even Bundaberg, kind of peaking for a few days there in mid-November, above last year's numbers, as is the case for Southern Queensland country as well towards the end of November there, which is encouraging to see. I mean, obviously the volumes of these tourism regions are much different, where you've got Gold Coast being clearly the highest versus Brisbane, but it's certainly still interesting. But if I do go through some of the volumes, just to give you an idea, what we're seeing in average daily, say for the Gold Coast, we're looking at about 15,000 in 2020. This is just visitors into the Gold Coast on an average daily basis, the Gold Coast tourism regions, versus nearly 29 that we were getting the same time last year, average daily, whereas Brisbane is about 8,000 this year versus 21,000 the year before. So certainly the volumes are still not where they were previously, but the signs of recovery are certainly there. And I think, again, the purpose of pulling these charts was to illustrate that it's possible to be done at a tourism region. It's possible to compare to previous periods or previous years, but also there's a possibility to then further break that down into age and gender and look at international travellers versus local, break the states down and even break the states down further into, you know, how they arrived, what was the mode of travel, where is their home location, and many other of the attributes that I mentioned before that are possible to be seen here. Look, this one was an even further deep dive. This was as of this morning, and actually as of 10 o'clock. So this is actually looking at how many people are in an area at any one time, and this is I can tell you as of 10 o'clock. So this refreshes every 5 minutes. So we look at the data for 5 minutes, then we refresh it because we differentiate between who's stationary versus who's moving. So we need some time to understand if that person is moving or stationary. And this is not looking at the tourism area, but it's looking at the SA2, so a much smaller area. But I can tell you as of 10 a.m. this morning, there was about 61,000 people in the Brisbane SA2, Brisbane City. And of those, there was about 1,300 interstate travellers versus the Surfers Paradise SA2 this morning. There was about 22,000 people there, and of those, just under 2,000 were interstate travellers. So why that was interesting, we thought we'd have a look, given the borders opened literally 2 days ago. The idea being that, you know, this is a very dynamic data set, and it's interesting, and you can do lots of cool things with it. Certainly we think so. So look, that's a little bit about overall cohorts and travel. We do events, I mentioned that. I wanted, although I'm sitting in Sydney, so this is not a great example, but this is game 3 of the State of Origin a few weeks ago. That was in Brisbane. I think there was just under 50,000 people in attendance. But, you know, for events like this, we might look at things like visitation. So we see most of on the top left here, people were from Queensland. In the middle here, we have the age demographic split. So 40% of those in the event in the stadium were 20 to 30-year-olds. The gender is majority male, which, interestingly, we've looked at the State of Origin games before, and I can tell you it was a bit more balanced than this latest game. And then at the bottom is the home location SA2. Sorry, yeah, this is SA2, so postcode is ranked according to where the people came from. So that's interesting. Other insights we might do for analysis like this is, how did people arrive? As in, you know, did they get driven? Did they walk? Was it public transport? We might look at dwell time. Did they leave immediately, or did they leave throughout the game? Where did they go next? So there's often a lot of public transport and ingress type questions and egress around events like this. So I thought that might be interesting as well. Look, nearly at the end of the slides, this is around the kind of things that are possible. So in terms of profiling visitors using this data set, so on the right hand side is some stuff that we've done previously with a client that they're okay with us sharing, where we took a cohort of travellers from China, and that middle chart is showing the order of places that they visit. In this case, it was actually airports. They wanted to understand visitation via airports. Which airports do they use when they come through Australia, and in which order? We've done similar analysis for places. So it doesn't have to be an airport. It can be places for travel for that cohort, or any cohort. But in this case, it was the Chinese traveller. Then that right-hand side chart was the Chinese travellers, where do they spend most of the time within the Sydney CBD? So you can see that shading. And then we did some segmentation for them below, which is actually, there was many other segments, but these ones were the ones that were interesting or stood out. And then on the bottom left is just, I know there was some airport parties or people that are involved with running airports on this webinar. So we've also done quite a bit of work on looking at terminals and behavior in airport terminals of, again, dwell time, the type of traveler that's there, how that varies hour by hour or even smaller increments day to day, and the behavior in and out of terminals, arrival, departures, etc. Which again is at times relevant. So that was a little bit on visitor profiling. If I then move to the last slide, which really helps to explain how this is delivered, and there are three ways that this usually gets delivered. It's either via reports that the clients seek and look for a particular time frame versus a particular area, depending on what they're interested in, or there's the opportunity to subscribe to and license the API, which someone like TEQ has gone all in on and actually does a lot of this analysis themselves. So there's depending on the maturity of the client and the use cases that are of interest, there's different ways to do that and actually consume the data in either via sort of more standard static reports versus an API that for those more technical users, that's how they can consume and that's how they can ingest the data. So I think that was it for my slides. Diana, I might just pause there and hopefully there's some questions. Hopefully that's given the audience a good view of what it is that we do, what we have and what we do with it, how it can be applied to tourism, and how it can then be consumed for those interested clients.
Thank you, Paul. That is, it's really quite mind-blowing how much data there is available there. You've outlined, I guess, the advantages of how large the data set is. What else are the benefits of using this compared to other complementary data sets like app data? Oh, you're on mute, Paul. Sorry. Are you able to just, yep, great.
Sorry. I think it's around recency. There's definitely a part of it. So as I mentioned, I mean, you just saw some data from literally this morning. Usually for our clients, that's not as important for tourism. That's more relevant for some of our other agencies or non-tourism clients, but recency is important. But the other thing, I think, it's the always on. It's the ability to see people over time that really allows you to create profiles and have a good understanding, because it's change over time that's often relevant. And some of the data that the app providers have out there is good, but it comes in bursts. Those apps are often collecting in bursts at a time and not always on. And don't get me wrong, that data is good, which is why it's one of the inputs that we have. So that data, that app data, is embedded in our data set here, but I think it's the blend of the app data and the GPS level data with the network, the mobile network data, that makes it really interesting and unique, such that, again, you can have the breadth, you can have the depth and detail of certain locations, and the ability to have data over time, I think, allows the depth of the segments that can be built from this.
Okay, thanks for that. We do have a question from Nigel from the Gold Coast team, just about how the DSpark data aligns with the National Visitor Survey definitions of day trips versus overnight trips.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've been working hard to align those definitions so they are exactly the same. And we do that because we are working now with Tourism Research Australia as a client. So they now ingest our data. In order for them to ingest it, it is in the format that is consistent to their definitions in terms of daily trippers, overnight stays, as well as the actual boundaries that they report on. So if you like, we've got the stamp of approval from that TRA organisation to then produce the data for tourism along those same definitions, and they will report on some of our data more at a macro level along the same definitions that they always have. So it's exactly the same.
Okay, that's great. You mentioned marketing to specific suburbs. What other ways can operators apply these insights into their marketing?
Yeah, so I think, look, there's a number of ways that we've seen our clients think about this data for for their campaigns. One of those is by having a better understanding of who is actually in a regional or in a tourism area at any point in time. And so that could be having an understanding of who's under or over indexing as to where they've come from. So then they might target them differently based on understanding actually where they're from, not from which airport they've come from, but where do they live? I think that's relevant. Secondly, how have they come here? So what route did they take? Did they go somewhere beforehand? Did they go somewhere afterwards? And what was the route that they took to get here? How long did they actually stay? And again, you know, not just for a particular, so we know often our operators get information from certain companies or certain businesses, but at a whole level. So from all of your tourists that are in a particular area, what's their behavior? Where else did they go? Where do they live? What else do they do? I think it's that ability to have the comprehensive journey for all of your tourists available is interesting. And then I think finally, kind of the dwell time. How long did they actually stay for? Because again, some of the reporting data may provide some of that, but perhaps not all of that. And the ability to see the dwell time or the stay time and compare that to other periods. We've seen them use that to then be able to target some of those areas, suburbs better based on stay time, dwell time, travel time before and after. I think we've seen them being quite creative and use that as inputs into their future campaigns, or even to start to think about attribution of existing campaigns that ran and the people that they targeted, did it actually do what they thought it would do, and did they actually achieve what they thought? So we're certainly seeing some of that in certain states, them starting to use this for attribution, not just targeting.
And what about with using the data to look at different experiences that people are participating in? If we can see that international or interstate visitors are participating in certain experiences, can that be used by operators with their packaging?
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of that. The example I showed you before, we were able to segment the Chinese traveller audience. We were able to look at those people who were let's say Melbourne. In that case, we were looking at Melbourne. How many of those travellers were going there to shop? And if they shop, where do they shop and how long did they spend time in malls? Others we saw were doing kind of outdoor activities. So based on where people spend time and the land use around that. So if it's a national park or a park in general, then we might infer that the purpose of that particular stay was more related to leisure or outdoor activities. So based on where there's visitation, you can certainly segment the audience as to what we think they were doing there. Certainly there's some inference with that, because again, it's a cohort view and it's a assumption based on the land use of what's available there to them. But it's something that we've done frequently with not just tourism clients, but even out of home clients who are interested in the movement of people and how they can then target them with their billboards and other inventory that they have. So that is possible. And again, why that's important is because you've got behavior over time. It's not just a burst of information about one place or a particular cohort, but it's those cohorts over time that enables you to be more confident in that segmentation.
Great, Paul, thanks so much. We don't have any other questions come through, so I'd like to thank you very much for your incredible insights that were shared with us today, and thank you also to everyone who has joined us this morning. We have posted a link to a poll in the chat to let us know if you've enjoyed this session. If you could take 30 seconds to complete that before we finish off, please. Look, please reach out to TEQ's Destinations team if you do have any further questions that have gone unanswered. We will endeavour to respond to you. So that concludes today's Special Invite Series webinar. Thanks again to Paul, and on behalf of Tourism and Events Queensland, I wish you a festive holiday season, and bye for now.